Maura's Moxie, Oppression of Tibet. Hello, Maura. How has the CCP tried to assassinate His Holiness Dalai Lama?
That's a very important question. Thank you for asking. I know Mr. Guo has referenced this as well in many of his interviews.
Yes.
That's why I reached out to Mr. Guo last year and wanted to work with you. It started, it really becoming very dangerous in 1995. There's a sect of Tibetan Buddhism called, within the Gelugpa sect, there's a worship of a very troublesome protector deity called Dorje Shugden, who has a mysterious origin. He was said to be a Tibetan monk, maybe 17th century, and was killed under strange circumstances and reincarnated as a protector of the Gelugpa order. There are 4 orders of Tibetan Buddhism. The Dalai Lama is head of the Gelugpas. But in exile, there's the Gelugpas, Nyingmapas, Khargyu, and Sakyas. And the Sakyas were the ones who were close to Kublai Khan, which created the priest-patron relationship that was traditionally the bond between the Chinese and the Tibetan people, which the communists destroyed, which the communists broke. They broke that covenant between the Tibetans and the Chinese people. So the Dorje Shugden cult got co-opted by the Chinese Communist Party. And they started paying off people to try to kill the Dalai Lama. And I was in Dharamsala in 1997 when there was a triple murder. 10 minutes in the Dalai Lama's bedroom. 10 minutes. It's a small place, Dharamsala. It's an old British hill station in the Himalayan foothills. It's very beautiful, but it's small. And it was the night before Tibetan New Year, which is Losar, which means New Year. Lo is year, Sar is new. So Losar. And we were all terrified. There was a lockdown in Dharamsala. We were not allowed to have our Tibetan New Year celebrations, which we had been planning. Just like the lockdown here is global, the CCP killed. But what was most frightening about it, it showed that they meant business. It showed that they really were going to take these very aggressive steps and that they would kill the Dalai Lama if they could. And there were, thank God bless the Indian government and God bless the Indian military, and Detective Singh made it his personal campaign to find out who these people were. They were monks from Tibet who'd escaped, who killed Lama Lobsang and his 2 attendants and made their way out and got back to Tibet. And then a few years ago, a monk escaped from, came out of Tibet, and he had been part of the Dorje Shugden gang, and he'd been offered money to kill the Dalai Lama. And these deals were cut in Kathmandu, Nepal. And he talked about being offered a huge bribe at the Annapurna Hotel, which used to be owned by the Nepali royal family. The Chinese were trying to buy it recently. It was a large amount of money in cash to kill the Dalai Lama. There's an excellent, hold on, I was just getting very upset thinking about this. He's my Lama and my teacher and my friend. I've known him since I was a child. So anyway.
Right.
He was a very good friend of my dad's as well. So anyway, there's an excellent book about this called The Dalai Lama and the Demon King, written by an Italian journalist. It's been translated into many languages, about the Dorje Shugden cult and how they're aligned with the CCP. And my friend Paul Mooney, who a very distinguished American journalist who lives in Thailand, he did a series of reports linking the CCP to the Dorje Shugden cult. Absolutely incontrovertible evidence. So you can look at Paul Mooney's excellent reporting on this. It's also been confirmed by the Indian government, Indian security, who protects the Dalai Lama. So with such vigilance, God bless the Indian government to this day. And it's very interesting. The Lama Garchen was his name, who was the leader of this Shugden thing. He just died of the COVID virus. Yes.
Is that karma?
Yes, that's karma. You know what they say about karma? There's an old Tibetan saying I'd like to share with your viewers. You know what they say about karma? Pay now or pay later.
Yeah.
But you gotta pay.
Yes. Yes. Interesting. So,
talking about His Holiness Dalai Lama, how different is the significance of him to the old and new Tibetan generations?
Oh, that's another wonderful question. There was another Tibetan prophecy that there would be only 14 Dalai Lamas, and he is the 14th Dalai Lama. And he's had the most remarkable life probably of any Dalai Lama. What other Dalai Lama traveled the world to impart the teachings of the Buddha? It was, thank God he escaped. And the world owes a great debt to those tough Kampa soldiers from eastern Tibet. Kampa is from the Kham province, eastern Tibet, who many of them died and smuggled the Dalai Lama out of the Norbolinka Palace in Tibet under the nose of the PLA guards. He took off his glasses. He is very nearsighted. So, and they dressed him as a Chinese guard, and he walked right past his jailers. And then he got on a coracle, on a boat, and he went down the river, and they found out that he had escaped only after he was sort of safely a couple days away, but he almost died 3 days from the Indian border. And then when, this is a story I heard not only from many Tibetans, but from some Gurkha soldiers who were working for the Indian army who were sent to receive him at the Tibet-Indian border, at the Pass in Tezpur in Arunachal Pradesh. They said when they knew the Dalai Lama was coming, they had him. They said, get ready, we've got to receive him. So there were 200 Gurkha soldiers waiting for him. And when as he was sick and dying 3 days from the Indian border, there was a Tibetan Lama in his group. He had his mother and his brother and his 2 sisters with him and 2 of his teachers. And they were just on ponies. And they had World War I rifles. It's the greatest escape story of the 20th century. Should have been made into a movie.
Yeah.
Anyway, a magical cloud appeared over the Dalai Lama's group, and it covered them all the way to the Indian border because the PLA Air Force was trying to bomb them and trying to find out where they were. And they had PLA reinforcements behind them trying to get them. And when he crossed the border into India, the cloud magically disappeared. And everyone looked up and they saw the Chinese Air Force turn around and go back. That's how close it was.
Wow.
And there'll never be another Dalai Lama like him because sadly, tragically, the old Tibet has been pretty much destroyed in Tibet. There are seeds of it that were planted by the Tibetan refugees across India, Bhutan, Nepal, and Sikkim, Ladakh, the Himalayan belt, which I spent many years working in and gathering oral histories from Tibetans, especially Tibetans that lived in the old Tibet. And in my trips to Tibet, I could see that the Sinification project was very well on its way to eradicating Tibetan culture, language, and civilization. And that has intensified under Xi Jinping. Our good friend Papa Xi. I like to call him Papa Xi. Because remember when he had this big personality cult thing going a few years ago? There are all these signs all over Asia and every airport of Papa Xi. Papa Xi knows best. So I always call him Papa Xi. Well, he has now forbidden the teaching of Tibetan language in Tibetan schools. Oh, Tibetan children must only learn Mandarin. And we're hearing a lot more about the concentration camp system in Xinjiang in recent years because it's newer. But those concentration camps were first established in Tibet. Tibet has always been the torture laboratory for the CCP. As Palden Gyatso, my friend Palden Gyatso, the monk, testified in his book and in our film. And Chen Guangquo, who was governor of Tibet, did such a bang-up job expanding the concentration camp system after 2008, the Beijing Olympics, because it was Tibet activists who threw blood on the face of Mao and destroyed his big Olympic coming out party in 2008. And every single day of the Beijing Olympics, my colleagues and my friends, the heroes at Students for a Free Tibet, had some kind of an action, including a die-in in Tiananmen Square, where people, shoot a capsule of blood and put the Tibetan flag over their chest and lay there dead for a whole hour. And we were able to get photographs of this out, and a banner hang saying, "One world, one dream, free Tibet on the Great Wall. And he spent 8 years working for this. So unfortunately, the people inside Tibet paid a very heavy price.
Yeah, sure.
And the crackdown intensified. Another, just to circle back to your question earlier about Google and Yahoo and big tech and Bill Gates and Tim Cook and Mark Zuckerberg and all those Americans who have the freedoms and privileges of being an American citizen, where you can criticize the head of state, you can call your senator a monster or a devil, and you won't get a bullet through your head like you would in communist China.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the technology transfer happened during the Beijing Olympics because they wanted what they called a terror-free Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they wanted to make sure that there wouldn't be a terrorist attack. So there was an enormous amount of American technology that went right straight into the hands of the Chinese communists for the Olympics, and they kept it. And they used it for their concentration camps, and they used it to torture children, and they used it to lock up Liu Xiaobo, and all Chinese dissidents, anybody who criticizes the Chinese government. And where was big tech on this? Complicit, blood dripping off their hands. And you know that the 2022 Olympics, it would be more of the same. I understand that the Japanese government is displeased that they had to cancel the Tokyo Olympics this summer, which cost them almost $1 billion because of the CCP virus.
Yeah.
You don't see elites in Japan or India apologizing for the CCP. Those are two countries, pretty much the only two countries I've seen where you see a real pushback against the CCP. Otherwise, in Southeast Asia, now that the great king, Thai King Rama IX is gone, it is very important to remember the legacy of King Rama IX, King Bhumibol, who was my lifelong hero.
Mm-hmm.
For 30 years, Thailand had to wage a violent war against the Thai Communist Party, the TCP, funded by Beijing, took away a lot of lives. His cousin, Princess Rangchit, was shot and killed by Thai communist rebels. He fought and he won. He's the only person who took on this CCP and beat them. And for many, many years afterwards, whenever Chinese leaders would come to Thailand, he would sit. He's a very elegant man and a brilliant man and bilingual and an artist and a scholar. He would sit and he'd stare them down, and they always sat a little lower than him. You see? All these things are very important to the Chinese communists, the symbolism. Like the symbolism of the Dalai Lama going out for meeting Obama by the trash. That's shameful. That's embarrassing. You know, and so now he's been dead for, it's been almost 4 years. He passed away at age 88 in Bangkok on October 13th, 2006. I was in Bangkok, and I spent 1.5 years in Thailand for his year of mourning. But now he's gone. And another thing the CCP is trying to do, which would enhance greatly their mobility, their capacity for waging war in Asia, is to build a canal, the Isthmus of Thailand, just as Thailand joins Malaysia. They tried to do it for years and years and years. And King Rama IX would always say to all the communist leaders who came and begged and pleaded for the opportunity to they would bypass the Straits of Malacca, and they'd be able to go straight into the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean so fast. They could get their warships there, boom, like that. Now they have to go through the Straits of Malacca. It's a much more difficult and longer passage. And King Rama IX would always say, oh, but if I did that, you see, I would have to split up my country, the Muslim South and the Buddhist North, and I'm afraid I just can't do that. I have to secure the sense that all Thais are one, and that we have one landmass and we're one people. Buddhists, Christians, Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, we're all Thais. So he was so clever and brilliant, but he's gone. Yeah. And with the pivot to Asia that was supposed to happen under Obama, didn't happen. A lot of my Thai friends were hoping that it would, but it didn't. And so now Asia is left vulnerable. And what are we going to do if they do build that canal? They can build it so fast. Already they're building hydro dams all over Tibet. What if they strike India from the high plateau? What's the West going to do now that the West is overwhelmed by the CCP virus? This is my biggest fear, that they're going to start a military strike very soon in Asia, just like they did with the Korean War, which was the perfect ruse to take people's eyes off the annexation of Tibet and Xinjiang in 50, 51, 52. They doubled their landmass by annexing Xinjiang, East Turkestan, and Tibet. And no one was paying attention because everyone was embroiled with the Korean War. That was clever. Don't think that I won't try it again. And this brings us to the very important issue of Hong Kong. But before we do that, I just want to say one thing. Another problem I have with these Western elites is that when they say, oh, China's not really communist anymore. Oh, really? Because all you have to do is go on their website and look at their constitution. I have a hard copy of it here.
That's the latest one. It's after the amendment.
Oh, no, this is, but it says very plainly, Article 1. I'll put it up. The People's Republic of China is a socialist state working under the people's democratic dictatorship led by the working class and based on the alliance of workers and peasants. Well, they already broke that promise to the Chinese people, did they not? And here's another good one. Their socialist system is the basic system of the People's Republic of China. Sabotage of the socialist system by any organization or individual is prohibited. And that gives them the power to kill Dr. Li, to torture Palden Gyatso, to try to kill the Dalai Lama. They call him a splittist and a separatist. I've also been called a separatist and a splittist. I mean, they go after me. They call me a Dalai Lama whore on social media. I've been called a Dalai Lama whore. I've been called a vicious splittist with blood in my heart. You know, and things like that. You know, actually, technically, the heart does pump blood. So very funny syntax and grammar there, guys. Got to up your propaganda game a little bit. Well, actually,
I appreciate your sense of humor.
Oh, well, you know, no, but it's true. It's like, she has blood in her heart. Yeah, well, technically speaking, that's correct. But I mean, the thing about Chinese propaganda that I find so disturbing, and the fact that the New York Times, which is supposed to be the paper of record, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, they all take full page color ads from Xinhua and China Daily every week. Now, the Telegraph in London has stopped doing that, and I commend them for that. But the New York Times hasn't stopped doing that. And they're also trying to blame President Trump for the pandemic. Now, whether you like President Trump or not, whether you voted for him or not, isn't the point. The point is he didn't start this pandemic. So I'd like to ask the New York Times, which side are you on? Are you working for the CCP or are you working for the American people? And Chinese propaganda has gotten better in recent years since they got the fancy tower in Times Square and the Xinhua headquarters in Washington, D.C., the big fancy $50 million headquarters, all that stuff. And it looks better, but you just get down to the nuts and bolts of it. And they call the Dalai Lama a splittist. And they say that Chairman Mao liberated Tibet from a feudal serfdom. And then, you know, they're Chinese propagandists. Tibet is the best lens through which you can study the Chinese Communist Party, how they operate, how they work, to know what's coming. It's also the best way to find out if a Westerner is really on the side of the CCP. Just ask them what they think about Tibet. Do they think it's an occupied country? Or do they think it's always been part of China, which is what the CCP alleges?
It's a very good tester.
Oh, it's very simple. I've told many of my friends, oh, do you want me to find out if your business partner are just how CCP he is? Let me have 5 minutes with him. For example, do you remember that gentleman called Andrew Yang who was running for president as a Democrat last year before he dropped out?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, I know he's CCP because we asked him a couple questions about Tibet and his whole body stiffened and his hands clenched and his eyes turned to me and went, Tibet is part of China. He also said, this isn't a good time for tariffs. If I'm president, I'll remove all tariffs on China. Oh, really, will ya? Working for the boys in Beijing. Papa Xi's going to send you a birthday card.
Yeah. Maybe also he has some overseas account to get more money coming.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, who knows?
You have to do to expose the collaborators.
Yeah.
It's harder to go after Papa Xi and the boys in Beijing when we're sitting in a shuttered, desolate, traumatized New York, Washington, or Boston. But we can go after their collaborators and their running dogs that are right here, right in front of us, beginning with the names in the age of society. Let's go after Tim Cook of Apple. Tim Cook was just named a part of Tsinghua University, and Bill Gates in 2017, of course, joined the Chinese Academy of Engineering to help the CCP and PLA develop their nuclear capacities. He is definitely on the side of the CCP. He makes no bones about it. No bones about it.
I have a question. What do the Tibetans in exile desire most?
It's very, 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 that's an important question. It's a sad question.
It is a sad question.
It's a sad question, for sure. A lot of my older Tibetan friends who were born in Tibet, who would be in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s now, said, I always thought we'd go back to Tibet. And some of them who were able to emigrate to the West and get American or Canadian or European passports were able to go back to Tibet to see a relative. But most have not. Because even if you have an American passport, if they see a Tibetan name, they won't give you a visa to the PRC. And so a lot of them have said to me in recent years, very sadly in gatherings and greetings and so forth, like, you know, we really thought it would turn out differently. We thought once the Dalai Lama got the Nobel Peace Prize in 1989, which was a response to the Tiananmen Square massacre, that there would be more global action on Tibet. But every time, thank you, Bill Clinton, thank you, Obama, thank you, George W. Bush, he went to the Olympics, George H.W., they all collaborated to sell out Tibet. And why does it matter so much? Why does not meeting the Dalai Lama matters so much? I mean, it may not seem like it matters so much if you're sitting in London, Paris, or Sydney or something, but it matters so much to the PRC, to the CCP, because he got out. He's the face of resistance. He's the face that something's wrong. How come the Dalai Lama can't go home? Why does he live in India? Why can't he go back to Tibet? What's wrong? And so when people also, another thing they did in recent years was they closed all the passes in Nepal that allowed people like my friend Paul Gasso to escape from Tibet and tell their stories of torture and persecution. There were several Tibetan torture survivors who were able to escape in the 80s and 90s. Paulden escaped in 1993. He came to America in 1994. And I had many gatherings for him at my house in Washington, where I was living then, where we had the electric cattle prods and the knives and the whips and so forth that we used on Tibetan prisoners. And I invited many, many members of the American elite, from the media, politics, military, you name it. And we had Paulden there, and we passed the torture instruments around. I wanted people to hold them. I took one of the cattle prods, and my hand literally fell to the ground. It was so full of evil and human suffering. So they can't say they didn't know. So the Chinese had to put a stop to this. And when there was the terrible massacre in the palace in Nepal in 2001. It was very fishy. I was working in Nepal for Radio Reparation at the time.
I read your article.
I thought the CCP was behind it, because the Karmapa Lama had escaped 1 year before, and that was the biggest Lama to escape since His Holiness Dalai Lama. And they were not going to let this happen. They had to shut it down. And in those days, up to 50, 60,000 people a year were escaping from Tibet. Last year, maybe 150 got out. Because all those passes along the Nepal border have been sealed. And now you have PLA soldiers standing there. And heaven help the poor Tibetans who tried to escape. If they try to escape, they'll get caught, and they're very, very likely to be tortured and killed. There was a very, very sad story a couple of months ago where about 12 Tibetans made it over the Everest Pass into Nepal, and the Nepali police handed them back to the PLA soldiers. And they were weeping and screaming and begging for their lives, saying, please let us stay, don't hold us back. But the Nepalis sent them right back, because Nepal has a Maoist government now. And in Nepal, you see the little red book translated into Nepali. And you see pictures of Mao everywhere. Mao, Marx, Stalin, Lenin. And it is terrible. And this started in 1995, the same year that the Dorji Shugden cult started. The PLA, I mean, I never underestimate the CCP. That's what I tell people. Never underestimate their capacity for evil and their long-term planning.
Yeah, indeed. How can the US and the Chinese people help the Tibetans today?
Well, that's a very thoughtful question. Thank you. You know, the Tibetan refugees in India and Nepal and Bhutan remain very poor. And they definitely need just basic needs to be met. Aside from that, there's the Tibet Fund and other organizations where you can donate. Aside from that, I think what's really important is to keep the issue alive while the Dalai Lama is still alive and with us.
Yes.
The last private audience I had with His Holiness in Dharamsala, he said to me, as I was leaving, he pulled me aside and said, Maura, my Tibetan doctors have told me that I'm going to outlive the Chinese Communist Party.
Oh, that's great.
And I
that's so.
And I said, Your Holiness, I certainly hope so.
Yeah.
But the Tibet issue is dead. I wouldn't waste any time working or giving any money to the International Campaign for Tibet, which is run by Richard Gere. They sold out a long time ago. They're not asking for independence. They spend too much money on salaries and admin, and they give very little back. A lot of my Tibetan friends do not like how they have co-opted the issue and sort of taken control of it and sort of hog all the money. If you really want to help Tibet, give money to Students for a Free Tibet. They're based in Manhattan. You can find them online. They are the most effective activist group out there, and always on a shoestring budget. I give money to them monthly, but they could always use more. But also just read their literature. Read about what they do. Educate yourself about Tibet before the history books are completely whitewashed by CCP propaganda. Write to your congressmen, write to your senators, write to your officials. I mean, after the Dalai Lama was snubbed by Obama in 2009, the reason that was so catastrophic for the movement is that it sent a message to world leaders: throw Tibet under a bus, throw the Dalai Lama out. And one by one, all world leaders did. In fact, His Holiness is not traveling very much anymore because he doesn't get security. David Cameron refused to give him security and protection when he was in England a few years ago. And the Georgie Shugden people were having a protest, and they were really pushing hard. And friends of mine who there said it was frightening. So the Dalai Lama is not traveling as much anymore. If you want to see him, you can see him in India. But there's tight security around him now because the CCP has been trying to assassinate him for years.
Wow.
And if you want to help the Tibetan people, learn about the true story of the Chinese Communist occupation of Tibet. Read my ex-husband's book, In Exile from the Land of Snows, by John Avedon. It came out in 1984, and it ripped the mask of Chinese Communist propaganda and exposed the criminality and the lies the Chinese tell about how they liberated Tibet from a feudal serfdom. Well, they killed nearly 2 million people out of a population of 6 million people. It's always been a small population. But you won't read about that in the United Nations. They won't discuss Tibet. We tried to get a little leverage, but I don't see Tibet being taken up by any politician now. But after the CCP virus, after this, maybe we'll see a different story. Maybe we'll see more interest.
Yeah, hopefully. Keeping hopeful. Yeah, let's do it.